Ladies and gentlemen and everyone in between, how lovely to see you all in Kenilworth. Thanks for joining us. You know, I've been thinking of something. Gamers are weird. Wait, no, not you lot. You lot are all normal. It's the other. Do you think it's weird that there are tens of thousands of video games that we can play, and yet we are fascinated with the ones that we can't play? The ones that never got released for a variety of reasons. Well, today we have a man who has spent nigh on 3 decades investigating the games that would. Now, I've had the privilege of listening to this man speak at the Cave down in Stroud, so I know what a treat you're in for. So can we have a very warm welcome to Mr. Frank Gasking!
Well, thank you everyone for coming along today. I'm really sort of blown away how many of you are here, so I hope I don't let you down today. Just a quick bit of background on myself. So during the day, I'm a web and software developer at the University of Kent, but at night time, I'm a digital preservationist and gaming historian, which makes me sound like a really crap. A bit closer, yeah? Sorry. Is that better? Okay, thank you. So basically, so during the night time, I'm a sort of software developer, sorry, mixed up now. So during the night, I'm a software preservationist and gaming historian, which makes me sound like a really crap sort of Bruce Wayne, basically. So what I do is I do a lot of contributions for projects such as the High Voltage SIG Collection, GameBase, and other different preservation projects, including Internet Archive. But one of my main interests is preserving unreleased games, and I run the games that weren't archived. So what that covers is unreleased and cancelled video games across a number of different platforms, but we also cover prototype video games too, so games where they're actually released but with minor differences, like content that was cut, for instance. But just really quickly, one of the first things I want to do is put a question to all of you, is can anyone tell me why they think games actually get cancelled?
Because they're rubbish.
Yeah?
Because a new console is coming out and they want to put it on that instead of the one that's currently happening.
Yeah, that happens as well. Any others at all? Yeah?
We're out of money.
Life.
Time to develop it.
Right, so I didn't quite... Paul, could you got the microphone?
Sorry, oh God.
Where am I going?
Just at the back.
This seemed a very long and elaborate reason, so I'm very interested.
I was going to say it might be perceived that it might compete with another product at the same price.
That is true. It might be. I imagine licensing might be an issue as well, Frank.
Yeah, licenses as well. I mean, there's a whole plethora of reasons why games are cancelled. I mean, it could be something... Bandersnatch. Yeah, Bandersnatch as well. I mean, the company collapsing in particular, that's a really good example. And basically, there's
Frank, you've opened a can of worms, mate.
Yeah, I have.
I'm just sitting here quietly, Frank.
Yeah.
I'll give you about 25 reasons, so I'm just sitting here quietly.
But yeah, there's so many reasons out there. It could be something as simple as a developer just getting bored of the game they're working on and deciding to go on to something else. And we'll see some of the reasons, hopefully today, in some of the examples I'm going to give. So the question I get asked a huge amount is why the obsession with unreleased games? Why the interest in it when there's so many really decent games already out there that you can buy? And I find it a really tricky thing to sort of answer. So what I thought I'd do is kind of talk you through how I got into unreleased games and what it was that really kick-started things for me. So this is me back in the early 90s. So I got a Commodore 64 back in 1990. I was a typical gaming nerd, and one of the things I really got into was gaming magazines. I absolutely fell in love with them. And I used to go down to the newsagents at 6:30 every morning, desperate to know what was on the cover tape. That was the most exciting thing about it. And a question I get asked a huge amount with this photo is just how short my brother's shorts. And to be honest, I don't know the answer, but he just has much better legs than I do. So one of the things that happened was, as the Commodore 64 started to die out commercially, the magazines had less and less games to actually review. So what they started to do, to fill the content, they started to do these retrospectives, where they were looking at various different genres of games. And these were great, because these opened up, in a pre-internet era, a way of me discovering other games for the platform. But it was one particular issue back in May 1993 which would really capture my imagination and set me on a trajectory which I would never have imagined. And it was an article called "This Was the Game That Wasn't, That Was the Game That Wasn't," and this was written by a chap called Ian Osborne. So this particular retrospective was very different because none of the games actually had any scores, because the games were never released in some cases, as you'll find out. And I was really captivated by this article and mesmerised by the fact there was all these wonderful games that we weren't meant to play. And that, in a strange way, increased my desire to actually want to get hold of those games and play them. The thing that really stood out in particular was the fact that the magazine had screenshots of those games. So surely the magazine must have had those games. So maybe there was a real chance I could play them. And then one particular game stood out in particular was a game called Great Guiana Sisters. So I was a huge fan of Super Mario Bros. At the time on the NES, and I was desperate for a Commodore 64 conversion. And unfortunately, we didn't quite get one, not until much later. But the thing about this particular game is it was actually released for a very short period of time. So there was a real chance that I could find this game in second-hand shops or from boot fairs or something. So I started this big search. This is the UK release as well, and I don't know if you can quite see it from there, but the thing I love about this is the fact that it's got like a little trademark under the logo, because like protecting your IP is like a really important thing. So I had no luck tracking this game down, so I spent about a year doing that. And around about the same time, though, I was frequenting into a shop called Computer World in Canterbury, which was an absolutely amazing place. So they stocked Commodore Amiga and Commodore 64 stuff. And then someone told me there was someone who worked there, a long blonde-haired guy, who was a massive Commodore 64 nut, just like myself. And I didn't really know anyone like that at the time, because everyone was moving on to consoles and that kind of thing. And that chap was a guy called Jason Kelk. So many of you might remember Jason from the pages of Retro Gamer. So he used to write the homebrew column for many years, and sadly he passed away back in 2021 due to a brave battle with COVID. And he was the absolute Commodore 64 guru to me. So I used to ask him all kinds of inane questions, but he was a fantastic programmer. He could put his mind to anything. He could program demos and games on a variety of different platforms, and we all really miss him very much. But one of the things that I got speaking to Jason about was about the subject of unreleased games, and I asked him if he had any of those games from Ian's original article, and much to my surprise, he did. So what I hadn't realised is that there was this massive underground network of crackers who were spreading games around, and some of these games had actually leaked. And some of the games on the first disc on the left were actually featured in that original article. So we ended up with a situation where these static screenshots that I'd been poring over for about a year or so would sort of suddenly come to life, and then I was able to play those games for myself. And it was a real magical moment, actually being able to play them. It almost felt slightly taboo, like, I wasn't really meant to be playing those games, and that was quite exciting. Almost like the game should have been supplied to me in a brown paper bag or something. And I got hooked as a result. I kind of wanted to see if there was any more like this that were out there. So I started trawling through all of the back issues of the magazines that I had, just seeing if there was any others that I'd missed, and which Ian had missed. And it seemed like he'd only merely scratched the surface. There were absolutely stacks and stacks of games that were never released, and I started to collate a notebook together, capturing the information that I was finding, and then I'd go back to Jason and ask him more questions about these games and see if he potentially had any of them. So around the same time, the Commodore 64 commercially declined to a point where there was no more games, and even the magazines then disappeared. So we kind of had to fill the gap ourselves. And Jason and another chap called Jason McKenzie, who's got the Cytronic stand outside, came up with this fanzine called Commodore Zone, which was running for about 6 years overall. And I used to write little reviews for it, and little contributions. And this is from roughly around that time when I was doing that. So there we've got the Commodore 64 that I used to write all the articles on, and the phone that I used to ring Jason up on as well. So I used to write these really atrocious articles. And I think my mum might even still have the pudding bowl if anyone needs a haircut. So if you need a haircut, just ask my mum. But anyway, I was wanting to come up with a regular article to contribute to Commodore Zone, and I wasn't quite sure what to do. And then Jason turned around and said, well, you keep bloody talking about unreleased games, why don't you do a feature on that? And it was a real sort of light bulb moment. And so the Games That Weren't article was born for the first time. And all this was, it was just a really shoddily written follow-up to Ian's article back in the day, and I did about 6 or 7 of these right up to the end of the magazine. But the surprising thing is that I started to get people writing in by letter, back before the days of email, just with suggestions of other games to cover. So other games that I'd missed, but also with information on some of the games that I did cover in the actual articles. So then that notebook was just growing and growing and growing, and to a point where it was easily outgrowing the article as a whole. So I needed some kind of other outlet to get things out there. But thankfully there was another big technological advance just around the corner, which was the internet. So in the late 90s, I finally got hold of a PC, a basic modem, and I think it was FreeServe at the time with a bit of web space. And I created my own HTML pages, including this very first archive, which was just an extension of that article. So it started off just with a really simple A to Z where you could download the games, and that was it, other games that I'd managed to find. But that very quickly changed where we did sort of pages of text on each game, which was quite handy because not all of the games were available for download, so we needed to put kind of a search out there. But once we put everything online, that kind of obviously connected us up to people from all over the world. So I started getting lots of emails from people with other games to actually cover on the site. I also started getting developers getting in touch with other suggestions and also giving it information on their games. So the site just completely exploded, which I wasn't expecting at all. And it got to a point I was having to do updates every week to try and keep up to date. So running a digital archive back in them days, back in sort of late 1999, early 2000, what kind of challenges do you reckon we might have had back then? Any suggestions? Bandwidth? Yeah. Anyone else? Sorry, what's that? Yep, web space, limited web space and FreeServe. There wasn't a huge amount, it could fill up quite quick.
Having the machines to, if you found anything, to actually run them, because emulators were not as widespread then.
Yeah, sometimes if you were given particular software and there was no emulator available, that's quite tricky as well. We didn't encounter that ourselves, but that would have been a particular issue. So some of the challenges that we had in particular, so one of the key things was the magazines, trying to get scans from magazines online was very difficult. We didn't have archive.org, all of the scans that Stephen Stuttard had done at the time of ZZap and Commodore format and so on. So I also didn't have a scanner, they were very expensive, so I had to take all these physical magazines into college and scan them in, and then I had to get them home. I had to get those high-res scans home, and we didn't have USB sticks. We had to have stacks of floppy disks just to get stuff home and then upload it onto the site. Other challenges is that not much information was actually online. It was really the beginning of the internet. And there was also a thing of kind of building trust as well. We were putting up pages asking people to contribute their work disks and to submit things to the site. But we could have been anyone. We could have taken that software and then gone and flogged it somewhere and made some money. So there was an element of trust that we had to try and build up. The other challenge was also trying to actually preserve the physical media that we had. So we didn't know how to do this in the beginning, but thankfully others had figured it out. So I bought this cable, an XE1541 cable from a guy in Hungary, and this allowed me to connect up a disk drive to a PC with a parallel port, and I'd use this piece of software called Star Commander, which you can see in the top left, which just connected up, read the disk, and you could move it across to the PC, which was really handy. And then the bonus of it is that I could also connect that to a Commodore 64 and then back up tapes as well, so you could get digital images of tapes. And that's essentially how I backed up all of the software for the likes of GameBase and other platforms, as well as anything unreleased that used to come in. So I mentioned about trust and that being a particular issue with the website. I would say there was a few pivotal moments which would really turn things around for us and kind of put us on the map and make us a very reputable sort of archive. So I'll just talk you through them now. The first one was one of the games that was featured in Ian's article, and this was a game called Deadlock that was being done by System 3 back in the early 90s. So this was being done by the same guys that did Armalite, so Dan Phillips and Rob Levy. And many people remember these wonderful screenshots that Robin had created the graphics for and just pored over them for years. We didn't have much information about the game, but we put a page up on the site, and then the developer Dan Phillips suddenly got in touch and said that he was in the process of backing all of his work disks up, which was quite exciting. And he said that what he would do, once he'd finished processing them all, he would send us some prototypes of the game. So true to his word, about 6 months later, again, that static screenshot that many of us have been poring over would come to life, and we were now suddenly able to play that game. And this caused quite a huge stir at the time because there was many others like myself that were desperate to see this game in action and play it for themselves. So people were now able to do that. But the additional thing that was quite surprising was when both Dan and Rob, they gave such a detailed account about what went wrong with the game, what it was that failed, which I wasn't expecting. They were really brutal. Essentially, they spent so much time on the look and feel of the game, but they didn't spend enough time on the actual gameplay. So as a result, it would eventually get canned. And it's a huge shame because it is quite good. It's really looking great at the moment. So you can check out all these prototypes on the website for yourself. For the next pivotal moment, can anyone tell me what could possibly connect an old rusty radiator and a briefcase?
Possible PC, mini PC creating with cooling.
Not quite. Anyone else?
Cookie discs.
Possibly.
Data rot.
What's that, sorry?
Data rot.
Data rot? Oh, you might do, potentially. Everyone looks really bemused. Okay. So what you might find shoved behind an old radiator is a briefcase with an unreleased Commodore game shoved inside it. And that's exactly what would happen with Solar Jetman for the Commodore 64. This is a true story. So Solar Jetman was a fantastic game on the NES. I used to love playing this. It was sort of like a souped up version of Gravitar and Thrust, really brutally difficult. And there was news that there was a Commodore 64 conversion in the magazines, as well as other home conversions being done by a company called Software Creations. But there wasn't really anything about it actually mentioned. There was no screenshots of anything shown. There was some Spectrum screenshots, but I wasn't aware of them at the time. So I assumed that naturally this was just vaporware, that nothing existed of it. But we put a page up on the website just to kind of put a call out there to see if we could get any information about it. And then suddenly the artist Hayden Dalton got in touch out of the blue and said that he worked on all of the conversions, did all of the graphics, and it was actually complete. He then put us in touch with the 64 developer, John Buckley, but neither of them had anything in the game, and they felt that this was probably one that couldn't be saved. Then all of a sudden, about 6 months later, Hayden's clearing out his garage because he's doing a move to America, and behind an old rusty radiator he found a briefcase. Inside there was a load of memorabilia from 1991 because he'd gone to a gaming show, and in the middle was 2 discs with Solar Jetman written on it. So very quickly he sent me this letter that you can see here, and sent those 2 discs down, not knowing what was on it. So he suggested it may have just been graphics or something like that. But much to our surprise, it happened to be the full game, complete. And again, this one just amazed everyone when we stuck it on the website, but for different reasons. Mainly because they weren't expecting to see this. This was something that came out of the blue, and suddenly we had this full conversion, and a pretty decent conversion of the NES game, even including music by the late Jeff Olin. And it was a really decent game overall. But what happened was, basically with Deadlock and Solar Jetman, having the developers and the artists getting in touch and then sharing their works gave confidence to other developers and artists and producers to also get in touch with us and share their memories, recollections, discs, and so on. So I really feel that these 2 particular games will kickstart things for us, and that's exactly what happened. So as a result, the website just continued to evolve and grow over time. We started to get lots of people getting in touch, offering other unreleased games. The design over time would change, but then we also started to get other people suggesting about covering different formats. So we had a guy called Adrian Simpson come up with the Amiga games that weren't. We also had a PC games that weren't, and also a 3DO one as well, which both of those unfortunately are no longer running today, but you can still see the pages on archive.org. Though Amiga games that weren't is still running today and still going strong, so they still occasionally are finding Amiga games, and of course Games That Weren't itself has also continued to evolve. Now we don't just cover Commodore 64 games, we also cover a variety of different platforms, and we're covering for those too. And I'd say we've got about 3,500 to 4,000 posts so far on the site with things that you can check out. But what's really important to mention, that it's not just me that's doing all of this. I'm very, very lucky to have a team behind us, and Andrew Fisher's here today, so he's one of the team members. So I have a team of researchers and people that help put stuff together and fix games up. But we also have the community as well. We have the people that get in touch with contact forms and on the comments. And it's without these people, if we didn't have these people helping us, then the archive would not be half of what it is today. So it's all thanks to those. So as I was nearing sort of 20 years of doing the site, it was quite a long time, and I was creeping towards 40 as well. I was starting to have a slight midlife crisis of sorts. And I kind of, because basically I work with stuff which is quite volatile, so software that you produce or websites that get chucked away after a couple of years, nothing was permanent. So I decided to try and do something like writing a book. I thought that'd be a perfect way of doing it, and talk about a subject that I was passionate about. So originally the book was just going to be essentially an extension of the website, just covering games that we'd already featured. But very quickly I decided to change it, so we covered multiple formats, and to also go into much more detail, talking to the developers and trying to tell as much of their story as possible. Because I was thinking that if this was going to be something that was sold to members of the public, I didn't want people to feel ripped off. I wanted to feel like they were getting value for money and that they were really going to enjoy it. It became a bit of a monster as a result of doing all of that. A book that I thought was only going to take about 1 year or two ended up taking 8 years in total, and it became quite a monster overall. Thankfully I had Sam Dyer from Bitmap Books. He very kindly sort of got hold of the book and would help to rein it in and get it out there essentially. But I remember when it was coming up to launch day, I kept imagining and having sleepless nights that he was going to have a warehouse full of books that he could not shift. So I was kind of thinking, oh, maybe he's going to have to think of selling it like a doorstop, or maybe it's like some kind of blunt instrument to kill people with, or something like that, just to get rid of it. But I was blown away by the response when it was released, and the first run out incredibly quickly, and we're now on our third run now, which is also about to run out. I think Sega Mag's outside have got possibly one of the last lot that are remaining. But the thing that was really amazing was people going on social media and posting selfies with the book, and just saying how great it was, which was really heartwarming because I was so worried about this getting out there. So it was really amazing. Thank you to anyone who has bought it. But the thing that I was really chuffed about as well, a special moment for me, was being able to give a copy back to the person who inspired it all. So Ian Osborne, who wrote that original article. So I was able to send him a copy, and that was very special to me. And the lovely thing as well is just last Christmas, if anyone got the ZZap annual, then you might have read his article on Games That Weren't. And this was where he essentially kind of talked about how his article had inspired the website and the book. And he also talked about some of the games that he originally covered, but then talked about additional information and findings that we had since made. And I hadn't expected this at all, so I remember getting this article and being really chuffed to bits. And I felt it was a real full circle moment overall, and something quite beautiful really. So writing the book, there was quite a few, even though it's hard work, there were some interesting stories that I really enjoyed doing for various reasons. So I thought I'd just kind of pull out a few quick examples for you. The first one is quite a controversial arcade game, and I just had to cover it since I knew the subject. It was a game called Oops. And this was a game that was being done in the late 70s for the arcade machines. And it was by a chap called Larry Rosenthal, who worked at a company called Vectorbeam. And it was very controversial because the idea is that you would have one player controlling a swarm of sperm on the screen. And the idea is that you had to fertilise an egg in the middle of the screen. The second player would control a syringe, and you would control it like an asteroid ship, and you'd have to shoot spermicide at the sperm to stop them from fertilising the egg. And you had to stop, if the egg got to 100% fertilisation, it would flash up with the word "oops" across the screen to signify game over. Now, perhaps unsurprisingly, the game didn't test very well. I don't think people really wanted to play it. I mean, what really said it all was when the secretaries ran out of the room screaming there's sperm on the screen when they saw it running. But the thing that I loved about this particular story was not only kind of sharing that, but it was also with the link that we found that was quite unintended. So Larry eventually left Vectorbeam to move on to Pastures New, and his work colleague Dan Sunday would take over the project to try and resurrect it and see if he could salvage it. The first thing he did was he fixed the syringe to the middle of the egg, so it just rotated, but that made it too hard. So what he decided to do was put these surrounding shields around the egg that would rotate. It made it better, but it wasn't quite enough to save it. However, the late Tim Skelly from Cinematronics, he was visiting Vectorbeam to see if they had any ideas they could resurrect and take back to Cinematronics, and he saw that prototype. So that inspired him. So when he went back to Cinematronics and one of his developers needed a new project to work on, he came up with the concept of Star Castle, with a protagonist in the middle of the screen and the rotating shields. And this was something we didn't expect to find that link. It was just by accident as we did this piece. That was one of my favourite things overall. The next game I'm mentioning because I'm a bit of a child and have that kind of sense of humour. So Dick's Special is quite a famous game on the Amiga. Many of you might remember the screenshots of this game in magazines. And this was being done by Sandy White of Ant-Attack fame. So it had this really iconic character who was bald with a red top and jeans, possibly could have been me maybe, modelled on. And the idea, it used this particular mode on the Amiga called Ham mode, which was not really meant for use in games, but he was going to have a go anyway and try and break the barriers a little bit. Unfortunately, it didn't quite work out for him, and so he would do like a new iteration of the game, which we didn't know about, and you can't really see it on there. In the top left, there's a set of screenshots from that prototype, which weren't shown in magazines at the time. But this particular write-up was really challenging to do because Sandy at the time was working with someone called Angela Sutherland, and they kind of went their own separate ways, and it wasn't in a particularly nice way either, so it was really tricky to cover both of their accounts in a sensitive way, because they didn't agree with each other, basically. It was trying to get that balance in the book, so that was tricky, but I think we managed to do that respectfully. But the additional thing as well is that this game had many different iterations that I wasn't aware of at the time. So after Sandy's version was cancelled at Rainbird, the game was actually taken to Activision, and it was resurrected as a game set on a cruise ship solving murder mysteries. But it didn't get very far. Activision got into financial trouble, and the game was cancelled early on. The person working on that game was someone called Patricia Curtis, who some of you might know is working on a shoot 'em up on the Spectrum Next at the moment. I think it's called TX something, so apologies, I can't quite remember. So they worked on the game at the time, and she was really taken by the character and the name. So what she did, she bought the rights to it off of Angela, and when she set up her own company, Miracle Games, with a guy called Graham Ashton, that was the first thing she wanted to get up and running. So Graham would work on this game for a bit, and they were essentially doing the same kind of thing, solving crimes, and there was like a pop-up office, like a TARDIS, where you had posters on the wall and you had to solve crimes. But Graham spent far too long on the engine, so it didn't get particularly far, and then they decided to go their own separate ways as well. And that was it. Patricia still has the rights to the game, so it's hopeful that she might even resurrect this today on the Spectrum Next or something like that, who knows. But it was the most complex story to cover in the book, and the longest overall as a result. Right, so the next game, I'm just going to say the title once, and then that's it, otherwise we really won't get in here after an hour. Okay, here goes. So this is Attack of the Mutant Zombie Flesh-Eating Chickens from Mars. Okay? Thank you. So this was a very famous game being worked on by Matthew Smith of Jet Set Willy and Manic Miner fame. And the reason I wanted to cover this, which Andrew's well aware of as well, is it was to solve a common misconception about the game, that this game eventually turned into Star Wars, and that wasn't the case at all. So that's the first thing we wanted to clear up. So what happened was, originally this started out as a Roadrunner game, and you had Matthew working on the ZX Spectrum version, and you had a chap called John Darnell working on the C64 version. The problem was, the two of them weren't working from a shared design. They were going in their very own separate directions in different offices. So you had two extremely different games coming together. And it was coming together well, until Software Projects realised they didn't actually have the licence to Roadrunner. US Gold had already nabbed it for doing the arcade conversions. So they had to hastily reskin everything and come up with something different. But rather than get the two of them working on Star Wars, which would make the most sense perhaps, they decided to get Matthew working on this game here, which I'm not going to say the title, and then John Darnell working on a new game called Star Wars, both just reskinning it essentially. But what's really strange as well is that both games had an extremely similar protagonist. So you both had a dog in a spacesuit. One was called Zappo the dog for Matthew's game, and you had Captain Paulstrong for the 64 one. So Star Wars was finished, it was released, but unfortunately Matthew struggled with his game and they didn't get very far at all. So unfortunately Matthew had a lot of things going on at the time and it was a struggle to get the game finished. So ultimately Software Projects cancelled it. And what would happen is they would take John Darnell's game and they would get Software Creations to do a ZX Spectrum version of it. So that's what happened. His game did not turn into Star Wars, and that was quite cool to try and get that out there and solve that myth. So doing the book kind of unearthed a lot of unexpected impacts and outcomes overall. For a start, a lot more developers from a variety of different platforms would start getting in touch, offering up software to include on the website, but also sharing their stories. So I would get a huge influx of information to put on the website, which I hadn't been expecting at all, and perhaps I should have foreseen it, I don't know. But the other thing as well, which really surprised me, was when I started to get development studios and universities and colleges that ran game design courses getting in touch and saying that they bought extra copies of the book for their staff rooms and for their libraries, because their members of staff and their students were all using it as a resource to kind of learn from other people's mistakes and to see the pitfalls of game development, but also to see that making mistakes and having an unreleased game is not necessarily a bad thing. It's all part of the learning process. So that was something that was really humbling to see, and it was strange actually, because I just set the website up originally as a mechanism of finding games that I could actually play that were unreleased, and then it grew into this big thing where people were now sharing their stories and kind of sharing that with others, and people were now learning from it, so that was really nice. Hunting for games today as a result has become a lot easier, so thankfully the technology has increased and made things a lot easier. We now have social media, which has its bad side, but it's allowed us to connect up with so many different people. So we've been able to kind of track down many more developers and people and get more information about games. It's also made it easier for people to get in touch with us, to share games as well, to back up. So very often we end up in a situation where we sent stacks of discs and God knows what to try and back up. So on the right hand side is what Chris Wilkins passed on to us to preserve, so the late Archer McLean's discs and CDs, which we spent quite a long time backing up and preserving, so with the source code, and we'll see an example of that a bit later on. The actual preservation of the materials has become easier as well compared to the earlier days of that old cable. So I use something called a cryoflux, which is the device on the right. It's just a PCB that allows me to connect up a floppy disk drive to the PC and back up a disk to a raw format. So it could be any format, it doesn't matter what format the disk is, it can allow me to back it up, and then I can convert it into a format you can run in an emulator. The device on the left is a grease weasel, very strange name, but basically essentially does the same thing. I've got that as a backup if the other one fails. Then on the Commodore 64, it's changed quite a lot as well. I use a device called the Ultimate 2 to back up unprotected games. Protected games I have to use the cryoflux to do that. Essentially, this is a fantastic device if you're not aware of it, and what it essentially gives me is a virtual disk drive, and I can daisy chain a normal disk drive up to it, and I can use standard copying software on the 64 to back up disks and back it up to a digital image. Then the device on the right is a DC2N. This is something that allows me to connect to Commodore Tape Deck, and that can just simply allow me to back up tapes to a digital image as well. But we also get very obscure formats to try and back up from time to time as well, and then we have to try and find a way and a mechanism of backing those up. So this is just one example. So from Archer McLean's materials, it had a whole set of jazz discs. I don't know if many of you remember those. They're about a gig in size, and it sounds like a jet engine when you fire the drive up. Thankfully, Alan Hamilton kindly gave us a drive, and then I had to source other bits and pieces off of eBay and various means, so I could get a working setup to put the drivers on and back the discs up. And we get this quite a lot. We get very obscure formats sent in to us that we have to try and find a way of backing up. So that's one of the other challenges we have today. So 25 years of doing an unreleased games website, there have been many hundreds of recoveries over the years that we've done. And there's far too many to mention here today, so otherwise we'll be here for a couple of days. So I've just pulled out 8 in particular, which I think are fairly significant. And if you are aware of the site, you may disagree with some of them, so I apologise for that. The first one is a game called Tiger, and this was a Black Tiger clone by the game by Capcom. And this was being done by Firebird Software by Gary Liddon, who worked on ZZap. So he was the programmer. And then you had a chap called Paul Drury, who's known for the Heart of Neon documentary. He did all of the graphics. And this was advertised for quite a few years in various magazines like ZZap, but it just completely disappeared when Firebird closed its doors. When they were taken over by Microprose, essentially, they decided to can it. Basically, Gary took too long working on the game. I think they got a Rainbow Islands arcade machine in Firebird, and that distracted him quite a lot. So in the end, they canned it, but thankfully he kept all of the source code. He passed this on to Jason Kelk, who then passed it on to us. It was in a PDS archive format, and we had two guys, Janny and Hemrick, very carefully piece it together in what they described as a 10,000 piece jigsaw puzzle. And here it is. You can actually play it for yourself. There isn't actually that much to play, if I'm fair. All the levels are there, but not much of the actual gameplay's in place. But it's there anyway, and you can browse the levels. The next one I'd say is one of our Holy Grail titles, or used to be at least, and this is Daffy Duck, which was to be released by Hi-Tech back in 1993. And Zap64 even reviewed it as well. It's one of the highest scoring Hi-Tech games, so that made us all more excited to try and play it. And we couldn't find it in the shops. And about a few months later, we found that Hi-Tech had basically collapsed, and they didn't get to mastering stage. So this kicks out like a really long search to try and find something of the game. So I got in touch with Hi-Tech, who no longer had anything. The actual developer and the artist as well no longer had anything as well. Even the magazines we got in touch with to see if they had any review copies, and they didn't have anything. So it was quite a few years where we were just kind of waiting and hoping that something might come forward. We even had hoaxes where people would fake screenshots saying they had copies of the game, so we had that kind of thing going on. And then all of a sudden, when I was doing the book, I decided to cover Daffy Duck as a multi-format entry in the book. So there was versions for the Spectrum, Amiga and Amstrad and so on that also weren't released. So I decided to cover that in much more detail. And I had to get back in touch with the 64 developers and artists just to kind of talk about the game and ask some questions. And that's when the artist turned around and said, "Oh, I've just recently discovered all of my discs from the attic." So I crapped myself, quite literally, and arranged to go up to Leamington Spa to kind of pick up his discs and offer to preserve them all. He was quite sure that nothing in the game would exist on there at all. He thought he just had graphics on there. But what he'd completely forgot was that he passed all of the code discs, his developer partner passed all of his code discs onto him. So we had the full source code to the game to piece together. And this was pieced together by a guy called Martin Pugh over several months and play tested heavily. So you can play the full game for yourself, just like Zap once did. The next game, the graphic artist might be in here, I'm not sure. Possibly, I don't know. Yeah, so this is Total Recall. So Total Recall's actually released by Ocean, but not this version. So originally what happened was, they got an external company called Active Minds to develop a version of the game, but the design wasn't particularly great, and progress on the game was pretty bad as well. So Simon Butler, the graphic artist, he kind of reported back to Ocean to say that this game was no way going to be ready in time for Christmas, for the Christmas 1990 release. So Ocean bought it in-house. And so they ended up spending an incredible 2 weeks. Okay, some people get reference, sorry. So they spent 2 weeks putting the game together and managed to get it out. I think it was after Christmas in the end. Anyway, they showed screenshots of this game in Zap, so I was still very keen to see how this original version looked and played. So we spent a number of years trying to track it down. We knew who the programmer was thanks to the magazines, a guy called Mike Lyons. He just suddenly turned up, found our webpage on the site and got in touch with the offer of preserving all his discs. And this was found just lurking around on there. There isn't much to it, there's a couple of levels, but it's quite cool seeing that screenshot sort of come to life, as with many of the games. So the next game's not a Commodore game, but it's quite very important, and it's a recent recovery that we made from the late Archer McLean. So when Archer did Drop Zone, one of the things in interviews that he always mentions is that how he was inspired by Defender and Stargate, but what he never mentioned was that he actually did official and proper conversions of Defender and Stargate intended for Atari. So back in 1982, he decided to come up with his own really good Defender game. He took it to Atari, but they rejected it, first of all. They didn't think, for some reason, they didn't think it was good enough, which was really surprising. But undeterred, when Stargate came out the next year, he took his code, updated it, and then took it to Atari UK and tried to pitch it. This time they were really excited, and they kind of loved the work that he did, but they'd already signed someone up at Atari to do the conversion, which ironically also wasn't released. So they did offer him a job though, which thankfully he didn't take, because if he did that, we may not have ended up with Drop Zone. So when we were backing up Arch McLean's discs, I found these prototypes on there and confirmation that he did these games, which was completely unexpected. And what's amazing is that if Atari had signed him up, we would never have had Drop Zone. So we're really lucky, thanks to Atari, they didn't sign him up and that he didn't take the job with them. These prototypes you can find on the website as well, and you can check them out for yourself. They're not complete, but it gives you a really good indication about how good a programmer he was, even in the very early days before Drop Zone. The next game is a game called Devious Designs, which I remember from magazines back in the day. I saw screenshots of it, and I was really taken by it because it was like a Tetris game mixed with platform elements, and I kind of found that very intriguing. It was done by the same people that did Myth on the Commodore 64, so Pete Barron and Bob Stevenson. They'd spent quite a long time working on the 64 version, but then were asked to move on to the 16-bit versions to focus on. So they did that, got it ready, and that was released. When they went back to finish the 64 version, Robert Maxwell decided to fall off his boat, and as a result, ImageWorks got closed down. So this meant that the 64 version never saw release, even though it was quite close to completion. So Pete Barron, he thankfully got in touch with us. He had all of his source discs. He sent this over to us, and it was all carefully pieced together, thanks to him and a guy called Glenn Roon Galfoy, who tried to piece together and make the most complete version of the game possible that you can play. So it's not quite complete, but it's mostly there. I think there's an end sequence at the end as well. Okay, the next game is a bit of a cheat, because this technically was released, but I had to share the story with you because of just how bizarre this was. Now this is a game called Monster Muncher, which was due for release by Spectrum Games on the VIC-20, and what's special about this is that it was written by Matthew Smith, in a very rare excursion away from the TRS-80 and the ZX Spectrum. See, he did this as a favour one afternoon for a friend to convert and do a Pac-Man clone in the space of an afternoon, and this is what he came out with. Unfortunately, it seemed to be missing, so only the ZX Spectrum seemed to exist, and Spectrum Games would eventually turn into Ocean Software, and that was that. So we assumed it was never released, and Matthew certainly didn't have anything of the game either. So we had a page up on the site for about 10 years, and then all of a sudden an eBay auction popped up with the game for sale. And we tried to get hold of it, but we missed out, unfortunately. And then the person who bought it, we tried to reach out to see if we could back it up, and we had no response at all. So it's looking like the game is still going to remain lost. Then something really strange happened. About a month later, I went to the Retro Computer Museum in Leicester. And it's an amazing place if you've never been there. I highly recommend checking it out. And upstairs, they've got this massive archive of all their games. And they've got an entire section for the VIC-20. So I started to browse through there because I was trying to see if they had any games which hadn't been yet preserved. And I was chatting to friends there, and I was kind of telling them the story about Monster Muncher, and I joked about how amazing it would be if the game happened to be on this shelf. Sure enough, I kind of take one game back, and there it is. And then I'm suddenly shaking, holding this copy, going, oh my god. And they're laughing. They think it's hilarious because I've just told them this story about this game being missing, and it was there all along. And what was even stranger as well is that Andy Spencer, who runs the archive, he's a massive Matthew Smith fan. He's even got a shrine dedicated to him, and he didn't realise he had this game in his collection all along. So yeah, you can check that out. It's quite buggy, but someone's done a fixed up version of the game, and it's quite amazing that he managed to do this in about 3 or 4 hours, and in BASIC as well. So, and then we've got the Bubbler. Now I love this game on Spectrum, or at least love the cover artwork. I used to see it in shops and was desperate to find a Commodore 64 version, but could never find it, so I didn't realise there wasn't a conversion at the time. And there was nothing in the magazines either to suggest there ever had been a conversion plan for the Commodore 64. It was thanks to Jason Kelk that I knew about this game because his friend worked on it at a company called Linsoft. They were asked by Ultimate Play the Game to convert the game to the 64, but with a really strict instruction that they had to replicate the exact same drawing routine that was used on the Spectrum version, which is a bit crazy considering that Spectrum has a much faster processor and can draw it faster. But he obliged and did it, and unfortunately the game came out feeling like you were wading through treacle. And Ultimate weren't very happy with that, funny enough, and they canned it. So thankfully Matt still had all of his discs, again in source code format, so he and another chap called Janny, who worked on Tiger, they carefully pieced it all together, and you can play the full game. It was actually complete. But if you do play it, I highly recommend that you run it in an emulator and speed it up a little bit, because it is very slow. And then finally, another game to highlight is one which always intrigued me back in the day, and Darren's well aware of this one as well. So Sieg Sputnik was trying to kind of build on the success of Frankie Goes to Hollywood that Ocean Software had done, doing a game based on a band. And it was being done by two guys called Tony Gibson and Mark Harrison. And they did games such as Ghetto Blaster for Virgin, and also, what was it called? They did a Greenpeace game as well, and Seaside Special, which was quite a politically charged sort of game. And they did that in a lot of their games, really. So they produced this game based on the band, and I remember this screenshot shown in magazines of a decapitated head with a chainsaw, and just wondering what the hell this game was. But that was it. There was no other screenshots of the game or anything like that. So we began this search trying to find it, and then one day someone got in touch saying that they saw, they remember seeing a demo at Enigma Variations. They went through some discs and found this randomly on a disc. And they recalled seeing 4 TV screens where you had to shoot at them with various different celebrities that would pop up. It sounded really bizarre. Unfortunately, it didn't have anything. But then all that changed. So thanks to Darren Melbourne, who works at Retro Games on the 64 Mini and Spectrum Mini, about 2013, Darren very kindly gave all of his work discs and Commodore 64 discs, and we started to preserve them to see if we could find anything unreleased. And Darren didn't know this was on here, so we found it as a file that just said Media Wars. We had no idea what it was. So I backed it up very quickly, loaded it up, and here it was. That game that the guy had seen back at Enigma Variations. And just how close we were to saving it, literally, after I got the files off the disc had completely worn out, so it was no longer readable. That's how close we were to saving it. We don't know if there's any other copies out there. The interesting thing about this one as well is that they tried to pitch this to various companies, and they took it to Domark, and there's a story about Domark telling them to F off, basically, because they're after too much money, and that was that. I think most of the companies done that as well. But unfortunately, although we've saved many different games, there are many which have got away, and I know the playtester who worked on this is going to smile in a minute. So the first one I'm going to mention is Murder. He knew I was going to say that. So this was an isometric Cluedo game that was being done by US Gold in the early 90s. It was actually released on 16-bit platforms, and it did quite well, it scored well, but unfortunately it didn't sell very well, and we think that's why the Commodore 64 version that was reviewed slightly later may have got cancelled, but no one seems to know. And we've contacted everyone from US Gold, including Simon, who's also helped us get in touch with people. We've contacted people at the magazines that reviewed it, and even found the developer, and no one has it. And it's a real shame. So we think this might be the one that kind of gets away from us and defeats us. But we'll never give up, like with any of the games, and who knows, we might even find a copy behind an old radiator or something. The next one is a game that I used to kind of follow a lot in the magazines at the time. It was Batman Returns by Konami on the 64. And this was quite a late game. And unfortunately, because it was quite late, this is ultimately why it was cancelled. It got to a stage where it was taking too long to develop, and they decided they weren't going to make any money from it. So they just released the 16-bit versions. If you saw the 16-bit versions, which were done by Denton Designs, you'll know that the scores and the actual game is atrocious. So you might wonder why I'm bothered about trying to find the 64 version. The thing is, I don't really care if the games are rubbish. I'm not trying to find amazing games, I'm just trying to find lost games, just because of the buzz of seeing the games in action. But who knows, it might be actually really good, who knows. But unfortunately the programmer doesn't have it. We think that Ali Noble and John Heap at Denton Designs might have something in their attic, but it's a case of trying to convince someone to climb up in their dusty attic to dig discs out, which I don't think is something you want to do on your Saturday or Sunday. Okay, the next game is one that also was a very late 64 game. So this was being done in 1993 by Enigma Variations and was being produced by Darren Melbourne. And this was quite late, and they weren't going to do 8-bit versions at all because Gremlin was going to decide to move on to other platforms. So I think magazines must have put in a request to their readers to try and write in, and it convinced Gremlin to do 8-bit versions. So here you've got like a little slip that was sent in, was printed in Commodore format, where you could write in to Gremlin and plead for them to actually do a C64 version, and it worked. Shortly afterwards, they had a little response saying that a 64 version was underway. Unfortunately, when the Amstrad and Spectrum versions were finished, the 64 version was about 6 weeks behind at the time. So this is back in March 1993, and Gremlin couldn't really wait much longer. They felt the time had passed and the market had moved on. So the 64 version was sadly cancelled, just 6 weeks away. Unfortunately, nothing has surfaced of the game just yet. It's been one of those that have eluded us for quite some time, but who knows what's around the corner. And then the last one is just a game, another US Gold game, which was a conversion of the Capcom arcade called Mega Twins. And the thing I love about this is the character artwork, which look like two kids that I might encounter in Dover, my hometown, later tonight. So this was canned because US Gold decided that they wanted to kind of focus more on games that were going to sell more money due to the platforms like shrinking. So the ZX Spectrum and the Amstrad versions were also canned. They focused on doing games such as Indiana Jones and Street Fighter 2 instead, which is a shame. The game was being done by Tiretex, which to most people that sends alarm bells because most of this output's quite rubbish. But the people working on this game had done a game called Alien Storm, which was actually pretty decent. Unfortunately, the programmer has nothing, usual story, but the artist did, and we managed to save some graphical assets, and we're able to kind of recreate the scan that you can see at the top using the original character graphics, but that's about it so far. And unfortunately, this might be one that gets away too. Right, to give my voice a slight rest, I wanted to kind of put over to you, what are your favourite unreleased games, or is there a particular game that you would really like to see recovered?
I've got a lot of information for you, so I don't have time before it's time. Should I have a chat with you? It's a bit of trivia. When Crash and Sinclair User merged together, I have a copy of it. Nigel Mansell's actually on the cover. That's the first issue where Crash was never mentioned again.
Oh wow,
so I
okay.
actually have that cover, so that's a bit of history behind that. I used to work for Warthog Games for the Gizmondo. We had unreleased versions of Defender, which was so terrible. I was a playtester on that. And I played Super Mario Brothers about a few years before Great Giant Sisters came out as a pirate version. Are you familiar with that?
So on the 64?
On the 64, actually with Mario on.
Yeah, so it's
way before Great Giant Sisters came out, and before Catechis.
Oh, so actually before Giant Sisters was
Yeah,
released?
way before that was.
I'm not aware of that, so maybe I have to have a chat with us afterwards.
It's happening live, Frank. I'll take a mic.
Okay, anyone else at all? Any particular game you would like to see, or maybe like to see us recover?
Conix Consoles.
Conix Consoles.
The game called now, we were looking forward to those.
We actually found a Conix game just a short while ago. It's on the site.
Here? Recently?
Yeah, through Darren. So there's an actual Conix game on the website, Magician's Apprentice. Yeah. So that was due out with the Conix multi-system, and yeah.
I have a question.
Yeah.
There was a game, I think it was Scooby-Doo by Elite.
Oh yeah,
on
on the
Spectrum.
Yeah.
Did that ever get found?
No, it's actually the artist has all of the discs with the artwork on, and there was going to be an attempt to try and preserve all of those discs, but I don't know what's actually happened with that. I think it's stalled. I think Steve Brown at the TZX Vault was looking into that to try and make arrangements, but the art discs have been found, so they need to try and back them up quite quick.
This might be a bit of a hopeless question.
Yep.
It's not an 8-bit, it's a 16-bit question, it's a
Okay.
SNES question. Rare made a version of Killer Instinct 2 for the SNES.
Okay.
It was fully completed, and then they abandoned it and they made it for the N64, and nobody's been able to coax the completed game out of the Stamper Brothers. So that might be a mega project for you.
I mean, that would be a massive undertaking to get anything out of the Stampers. I know that one of the Stampers has been posting on social media recently, so he has been open to opening up the archives and sharing stuff. So there is a chance that he might show something of it, but actually releasing it, I'm not so sure. That's the thing, that's the challenge.
Just
Yep.
for the Scooby-Doo part,
Yep.
the C64 version, the artist was actually here last year. I think it's here, I'm not sure it's here now. He signed my copy of Scooby-Doo on the C64. It's on display at my house.
Oh,
so
nice.
that ties in with the other person's question. So he might have some information, and I think he might be one of our guests.
It's unlikely.
Moby Games.
He probably won't have any information about the original
No.
one, because the version of Scooby-Doo that eventually was released was done by Gargoyle Games as like a rush job, essentially, just to replace and get something out there. So they probably wouldn't be familiar with the original version. It was only on, it was done for Elite by Gargoyle Games. The original version that was like Dragon's Lair with the amazing graphics, that was done internally by John Harrison, I think was the graphic artist, and Richard Wilcox was doing the code. Do one more quickly? Yeah.
Well, obviously, I've enjoyed being part of the team that helps you over the years. I just wanted to fill in one or two sort of details as you've gone through. Nigel Mansell on the end there, it's actually a case of there's 2 different Nigel Mansell games on release, because obviously there's the early one by Martech.
Oh yes, of course, yeah.
I'd love to play that game. I think that one would have turned out quite well at the time. And obviously, having interviewed John Darnell and got the story about Star Wars, I think my favourite part of that is the story about trying to force Matthew Smith into working on Zombie Chickens. They printed the covers of the game, so they had fully ready tape covers to go. And there's one occasion he was actually sleeping on a pallet of them in the warehouse.
Yeah.
It was a lovely story. And you mentioned the Greenpeace game. That's called Rainbow Warrior by was that from Microplay.
Yeah.
So that's as you say, Tony Gibson and Mark Harrison. Sadly, Tony no longer with us. But yeah, Tony was very passionate about environmental projects. So that's partly where the irradiated seaweed in Seaside Special comes from. And but a question I wanted to ask was, there's obviously been this big announcement recently, excuse me, from the Japanese companies saying that they're going to attempt to try and preserve more. Is there anything you're looking forward to from those efforts?
Oh, where do I start? I can't think of anything off the top of my head because my brain's gone to mush doing this talk today. But there's so many things. I'd like to see the original Terminator on the NES before it turned into Journey to Silius, I think it turned into. So I'd love to see the original Sunsoft iteration of that game. And I'm sure there's many others. And just one more? Yeah.
Oh, I'm Frank. We've known each other a long time. Just to add to what Andrew said about zombie chickens from Mars, it was actually my friend Keith Ainsworth who actually first ran into the inlay for the game. So any information about that coming out sort of first came out through him. And, I've actually had one of the things actually in my hand soon after he found it. It was kind of like, okay, what is this? We don't know anything about it. It's got software projects on. What is all this about? And that kind of sent us a little bit down the rabbit hole, trying to work out, okay, what was this all about? And obviously down the line, we found out that no, it wasn't actually turned into Star Wars, as you say. It was kind of like 2 different projects that branched off the same thing. I've now forgot what I was actually going to.
You've been lost for words, mate.
Yeah, I know. Usually, I say quite unusual. Yeah, I'm trying to think what my original next point was going to be. I'll have to hand it back to Paul.
Yeah, I'm sure. There's questions at the end, I'm sure.
Okay. So my favourite unreleased game, and the musician's going to really grumble at this, I'm afraid, because he's here at the back, is a game called Spellcast. And this was actually the very first unreleased game that I ever played, but I didn't realise at the time. So when I was getting games second-hand in the shops, I used to pick up the old ZZap cover mounts, and this was one of the demos on it. So I just assumed it was a preview, and there was a full game out there. So I started searching in the likes of Boots and John Menzies trying to find it, and getting very disappointed. It wasn't until I actually got the magazine that I realised that they released it on there just to kind of showcase what their talents were. And it was an exceptional game. It's like a cross between Castlevania and Ghosts and Goblins, I'd say. And it feels like a NES game a little bit as well. And I just fell in love with it. And what was really sad to find out is that they actually pitched this to lots of different companies. So it was done by Genesis Software, the same people that did CJ's Elephant Antics and Spike in Transylvania. They pitched it to places like Codemasters and even Ocean Software, I think, and they all rejected it. They wouldn't pick it up, and it's staggering because of the rubbish that did get released. And it's well worth checking out if you're not familiar with it. And what I really hope one day is that someone might reverse engineer it and actually try and finish the game off. There's a blueprint on the title screen that actually maps out in a Ghost and Goblin sort of way all of the levels. So someone could pick it up. So if anyone fancies a challenge, then you'd make like 43-year-old me very, very happy. But it does happen. That's one of the side effects of the site, is that some people have actually finished off some of the games that we've managed to find, and that does happen. So I'm hopeful anyway. So I'm getting near the end, so you'll be pleased to know. So challenges today. Unfortunately, although we're saving as much as we can, we just can't possibly save everything. And unfortunately, we're losing lots and lots of games as we speak. There's like too much out there to save and not enough of us doing the actual saving work. In addition to that, the medium, so the discs and the tapes and the other formats, they're all slowly starting to deteriorate because a lot of it's over 40 years old now. So it really is a race against time to try and save as much software as we possibly can, not just unreleased, but released too. And another sad thing as well is, as we all get older, the developers and the artists and all the producers and people that created these wonderful games, both released and unreleased, are now starting to pass away. So we're losing the stories too. And many stories still haven't been captured by some people. So again, it's a massive race against time, and all we can do as much as we can to try and save what we can. The key thing to mention, we're talking about games that weren't today. It's very important to say that it's not just us. I mean, we are thankfully part of a collective of different archives and organisations that are also trying to do the same thing, preserving not only software but hardware too. And we're very thankful to have these people, but we need more sort of people like this, because essentially it's, for many of us, it's just a hobby. We're all doing this in our spare time. This is not a full-time job as much as I'd love it to be. And you don't have to run an archive yourself or anything like that. It could be something as simple as just contacting through a contact form or posting a comment on a thread or sharing a scan. Anything like that helps us out a lot and just helps us to save as much as we possibly can. So what's next for games that weren't is something I get asked a few times, what's coming up next. So we're currently working on a load more digital archives and discs to back up, so there's going to be a lot more findings on the website over time. We've recently found a load of NES games and released an unreleased Conics game as well, which you can check out. And that's thanks to Darren and Mark Greenshields for kind of giving access to their archives. Basically, I'm just going to carry on doing what I'm doing, as long as it's still fun, which thankfully it is. I still get a buzz out of finding something unreleased for the first time. I'm just going to keep going. And the icon, the logo, gives a slight clue that I'm also working on a second book, and I've been working on it for about 2 years now, just over. It's been a little bit slow because I've got elderly relatives. One of them passed away last summer, and it's been quite tough to kind of juggle caring and writing the book at the same time, but it's getting there, and hopefully in the next couple of years that will be done. So just to kind of finish off, I wanted to do, so last time I did a story about Rob Hubbard, which went quite bad, because I tried to do a Newcastle accent and he's from York, so that was not good for me. So I thought I'd not embarrass myself with that again. So I thought I'd do a little reveal about a new finding for a game that's been missing for 32 years, and it's one that very almost got away, but not quite. I don't know if you can see it anyway. So this is Nigel Mansell's World Championship Challenge, which was due for release back in 1993 by Gremlin. So again, one that was cancelled 6 weeks away from completion. Okay, so I did mention this earlier. Now, I'll be honest, about a couple of months ago I was setting the slides up for this talk, and it was included as a game that was sadly eluding us. And then literally a month later, Darren and Mark got in touch with the archive, and tucked away was pretty much the entire source code for the game. So this is currently being worked on at the moment, and this isn't finished. It's quite glitchy. The road will bug out at some point, you might see. But it's mostly there. It seems like all the tracks are there, and other bits and pieces. So there might not be too much work to do, thankfully, to make it into an actual... Oh, the moustache is missing. Yeah, I don't know if there's a loading screen, unfortunately. There's music there and sound effects which we weren't expecting, so it's actually a lot further ahead than we thought. So this, again, is being worked on at the moment by a chap called Dave Simmons, who's carefully piecing it together from the source code. We're hoping to fix as many of the bugs as possible and tidy it up into the most complete version of the game that we possibly can. And it's thanks to Darren for kind of allowing this to happen. So Darren was the producer on the game. So yeah, keep an eye out on the website for it, and hopefully it'll be up very soon. And that's me.
Hey! Brilliant. Okay, that was pretty fun. Okay, we've got time for a few questions. I'm actually going to abuse my position. Is that you gave some really heartwarming stories there about developers really helping you out finding discs behind radiators and passing them on to you. Frank, have you ever come across a developer when you've inquired about a game, or maybe he's even got it, and he's desperate for it not to be discovered?
The one thing that sticks in my mind is when I got in touch with the developer who did a game called, I think it wasn't Entombed, it's the one with the flying eagles and...
Oh yeah, begins with I.
Andrew, can you help me out here? What was it? It scored really badly by Ultimate Play.
Impotent, yeah.
Imhotep. That's it, thank you, Simon. So Imhotep, it was done by this particular guy, I can't remember his name, and I found out that he worked on another game, and it was mentioned, a little screenshot was shown. So we had a little page on the website, and I was kind of gently sort of encouraging him to release this game, and he seemed quite keen at first, but then unfortunately, when he sort of got back involved on the retro scene, he had a lot of abuse for his work on Imhotep. So lots of people slagged him off because the game was so bad, which was really unfair. And as a result, he kind of turned around in the end and said, actually, can you take anything mentioning my name and mention this game off the site? I don't really want to be involved anymore. And that was quite sad, really. We do get situations like that, unfortunately.
Anyway, if anyone would like to ask a question, please you raise your hand in the traditional format. There we go, over here, if you can remember yours.
Do you get many takedown requests? You know, lawyers hassling you to delete stuff?
Not very often, it's quite rare. We've been very lucky. I mean, we try and get permission from people before we put stuff on the site where we possibly can. It's not always possible to do that. What we have is a caveat on there to say that if anyone's unhappy with anything on the website, we'll take it down straight away, and we don't have a problem with that. The main thing is we're just trying to preserve what we can. Most often, if we don't preserve these games, then they're going to be lost. So we'd rather preserve it and get asked to take it down, or even beforehand, if we're preserving something for someone, they might turn around and say, actually, you can release these bits, but maybe not these things. I might want to do something with that. We've had instances like that. With Archie McLean's work, we've preserved all of his source code for his games, and obviously we won't put that on the website unless we get permission to do so.
Hello.
Okay. Hello.
Is there a fine line between getting a completed game, getting artifacts, and feeling like you're actually developing the game? Do you see what I mean? If it's not entirely complete, is there a line you draw where you say, well, actually, this is us completing the game, so we can't really announce this as a finished game? Do you see what I mean?
It is a tricky one, actually. It depends on the state of the game that we get hold of. So if the game is at a certain stage where it might only just need a little polishing up to actually make it playable, then we will try and take the extra effort to do that. But most often, we'll just construct things as they were and in their final state. But there have been cases, so Devious Designs, for instance, the original programmer that worked on it actually worked with the guy reconstructing the game and actually helped to kind of fix some issues to make it like as close to the final version as possible. But it stopped short at actually adding the extras to make it a proper finished game. There was no sound in it, for instance, apart from sound effects. But yeah, it's a tricky one. We don't tend to finish the games off, but we do get others get in touch asking if they could possibly take a game, reverse engineer it and finish it. One example is a game called Fuzzball that was due for release by System 3. So the game's there was a preview released on the magazine, thankfully, so there's some code out there. The development team actually reverse engineered it and actually started adding additional levels and some additional music that we found. But unfortunately that's stalled. So it does happen, but it's usually outside people that do that. Yeah.
Hiya. The Last Ninja collection, I think, is coming out later this year from System 3. That's got Archie McLean's IK Plus on it, I think, and some stuff. Have you been involved with that?
There's IK++, I think, but I'm not sure if Archie was actually involved in it at all or not. I'm not entirely sure.
I think there was.
They're saying that he was, but I don't know if he actually was.
I think he did the PlayStation version, or...
Oh, right, okay.
It was in the cabinet last year, or, well, 2 years ago.
Oh, so they got a PlayStation version. Oh,
yeah.
I was thinking more the IK++. So the original IK Plus on the PlayStation.
Yeah, Archie did that, didn't he?
Yeah.
IK Plus, yeah.
Sorry, I thought you meant the plus one.
Yeah, no.
How many pluses do you want, Frank?
Yeah,
as many as I can get.
I think there's some unreleased versions coming out on the Last Ninja collection of it.
Yeah,
I
so
just wondered if you were involved or don't.
I've not been involved on it. I've backed it, so I'll be getting a copy soon. So there's IK++, which is I think a PC build, and then there's some builds from Last Ninja on there for the new Last Ninja that's being done. I think it's 2 builds in total. We've been told that we can't put the demos on the website, but we've been given permission to take videos of the gameplay. So that's what we're going to be doing once we get hold of it. I think it's in the next couple of months. It should be going out.
Okay, I've got time for just one more question.
Okay.
Hey, you remember?
Vaguely. It was to do with something, and must admit I was completely unaware of this until about a week ago that I was reading. The Japanese Video Game Preservation Society that you might be aware of. It was an article and a feature on them that they are, have got this massive archive of Japanese only material and games, but they are really, really struggling at the moment in terms of contributions and money to be able to house everything, keep everything preserved, keep everything available for people to actually either look at, play, or in any sense of that. Do you feel fortunate that you have been so generously given an awful lot of stuff your end that you don't have to have worried about having to fork out massive amounts of money for this sort of, apart from the time when we have bought stuff on eBay, for example, simply for the purposes of actually preserving it, because there's no other way it was going to be done. But do you feel incredibly thankful that so many people have been so generous over the years that in terms of what financially it could have cost to actually put all of this together, it's actually been rather insignificant?
I think we've been extremely lucky to have people just contribute towards us. We don't make a profit from the website or ask for donations or anything like that at all. We used to for hosting costs. So yeah, we don't have like a pool of funds to buy games online as well. And I think the reason why we don't do that is I feel a bit uncomfortable taking people's money. I kind of try and want to do things off my own back and do it myself, so I don't have that kind of thing hanging over me or any particular guilt. So I try and do as much as I can off my own back, and it feels better that way. I don't have to worry about anything like that at all. The hosting I can sort out myself and that kind of thing. So I do heavily rely on people being very generous with what they're offering to back up, and hopefully they feel the same for me backing their work up as well. That I'm taking time to hopefully save all their source code as well at the same time. I try and give something a little bit back at the same time, and it seems to work at the moment. I don't know if that will change at all. Yeah, maybe I do need to change it in the future if people start selling more and more on eBay, for instance, because that'll make our job a lot harder. I really don't want to go down that route if I can help it.
Well, long may you rely on the kindness of strangers and indeed friends as well. So can I just say thank you all for coming. If you've not got a copy of Frank's absolutely brilliant book, I've got one, it's great. There may be a few out there. If you've got one on your lap now and would like Frank to sign it, then he'll charge you as usual. Is it still a pint of signature?
50 quid, I think.
All right, I thought it was a pint of signature. I was going, all right. That's inflation for you, okay? Just to say, the next talk here is with Andy Davidson and Stuart Cook, hosted by the lovely Ian Lee. So, come on. So, only it's like partisan crowd. Okay, so just finally, thank you so much for coming, and let's hear it for the fantastic Frank Gasking.